Before I start, I just have to say, I was here last night and early this morning, and I'm just really humbled by all the incredible volunteers that give of their time and energy freely. It's really inspiring for me. So can we just all acknowledge the volunteers that have made this event possible? I think it's safe to say every one of us here has a deep desire to connect with others. Of course, in life, but also in the work we do. I mean, we all want to create something that's meaningful and truthful, that speaks to others and, connects with their humanity. And at its core, that's what empathy is. It's been said our souls aren't hungry for fame or wealth, comfort or power. They're hungry for meaning. And we all have this desire to be a light. And the Greek etymology of empathy actually means passion. A lot of times when I think about purpose and passion, I envision this internal flame that's inside of us. And the thing about a flame is once it's lit and once it's ablaze, it can have unlimited potential, but without a spark, it's dormant and its potential will never be realized. So the key or the catalyst is the spark. That's today what I'm going to actually talk to you about, is this spark that can not only ignite your creativity, but can help you discover your purpose and maybe most importantly, allow you to beam and radiate and be a light to others. So there's 5 principles I'm going to share with you. They should be easy to remember because they're all nested in the word. So the first key is the S. Before you find your spark, you have to understand your story. Let me just briefly start by telling you what brought me here today. So my friend has this great saying that art's like a language. Language is the thing that unifies us. So I think it's for that reason I've always strived to be multilingual as an artist, to learn to speak the language of music and photography and design. So I'm a commercial photographer. I have a huge passion for music, so I produce and compose every spare minute I can get. And I'm a founder of a boutique design studio here in town. We've had just enormous privilege to work with visionaries like Maya Angelou, design interactive installations for the Johnny Cash Museum, and for pro sports teams, work on feature films with luxury travel companies and nonprofits all over the world. But one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that my work is not my worth. I know what it's like to have your existence wrapped up in what you do or a title behind your name. And I used to work so hard in trying to be successful that I was just ultimately left alone and burnt out because I was the one working late nights and weekends when everybody else I knew was out having a balanced life. So I'm in a place now, if the only thing I've ever known for is being a husband and father, I want to be okay with that. I've learned to let go of this need for what's next or what's better because right now is beautiful. Once I found that spark, everything changed for me. My story seemed to make sense. I learned when you chase what you don't have, you ignore the incredible things you do have. And sometimes thinking about our own story can be kind of scary. There are thousands of people out there with the same degree you have. There are thousands of people in the same career you're in. And I think for that reason, it's easy to question our own purpose, if the work we create will ever be good enough or if our story will even matter. We each have about 30,000 days of life. So if you think of a book with 30,000 pages, every day we turn a page and fill it with a narrative that's completely unique. And think about this, there are billions of stories being written right this very moment, and there's never been a story like yours. And there never will be. So it's this gift, but so many of us have been guilty of living a story that others expect of us rather than writing the story that only you are capable of writing. So embrace the story you're living. Don't resent it. Don't imagine yourself elsewhere. One of the greatest gifts you've ever been given is your authenticity. Once you find your unique story, then you find your calling. And I love the word vocation for that reason. It embodies it perfectly. So in Latin, the word is vocare. It means voice. So to follow the voice of God or do what we're called to do. Buechner said it best, the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet, that intersecting point is your calling, your vocation. Your inner voice, that calling, never leaves you. You just have to listen for it. We are shaped and fashioned by what we love. We're the sum of our influences. Ken Robinson said, if you're doing something you love, an hour can seem like 5 minutes, but if you're doing something that doesn't resonate with your spirit, 5 minutes can seem like an hour. So I love the story of my friend Riyadh. He grew up in the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization in Syria. and learned everything there was to know about cooking at a young age. And as a young child, worked on the Silk Road, so he learned everything there was to know about spices. So you would think that the culinary career would be a natural step for him, but because of family pressure, he became a lawyer, and would just come home after these long, grueling days, and even if he'd already eaten, and even if it was midnight, he'd still cook because it was the one thing that brought him joy. He'd just put it in the fridge and go to sleep. And decided to do something bold, left his career, and opened up this restaurant, and they struggled to even keep the lights on for a couple years. But now this little cafe, just a few minutes from my house, with about 20 tables, they've been featured on the Food Network. He's had dignitaries and celebrities flying from all over the world. And he had a restaurateur flying once from London. The guy said, "I want to franchise you all throughout Europe." And he said, "No, thank you." And his friends were like, "Are you crazy? You could be in paradise right now." And he said something I'll always remember. He said, "You're missing the point. I'm already doing what I love. I'm already in paradise because every day I show up to work, and every day I'm in that kitchen, I found my calling." Once you learn to find your voice, you begin to understand the things that made you unique from everyone else. And music's a perfect way to illustrate this through tone. So there's this analogy that says if a great guitarist like Jack White, went into a pawn shop, picked up an old guitar that was out of tune and plugged it into a dusty amp, he'd still sound like Jack White. And if you had all of Jack White's gear at your disposal, you'd still sound like you. So the truth is, it's not the gear that matters, it's you. It's your tone, your ideas, and your personality. There's no amount of technology that's going to turn a mediocre artist into a great artist. So focus on developing your voice, on your tone, rather than worrying about filters and gadgets and plugins. It takes a long time to sound like yourself and find your tone. And I think we all have this idea of how our perfect story is going to turn out. But the truth is, it's full of bumps and valleys and unexpected turns. But this is what molds our tone. This is what shapes us into who we are. I'm sure those of you that have been through hard times know that you can learn more in a week in the valley than in a year in the mountaintop. And sometimes it's only through experience that we understand what we truly want. Let's just say these cars represent the type of work that you identify with. If I were to take a poll here and say, which one of these cars do you resonate with? I'm sure everyone here would probably say the Bentley, of course. It's this beautiful handcrafted car. It takes 400 hours to build one of these cars by hand. But the car on the left, it's called the Nano. It's one of the smallest cars in the world. The engine's roughly the same horsepower as a lawnmower. The trunk's barely big enough to fit a duffel bag. But what this car lacks in amenities, its low cost allows thousands of families in some of the world's poorest regions to now have this joy and pride and utility of having personal transportation for the first time in their lives. So I don't know which one of these you identify with now with that context, but I love that we're in an age where creatives just like you are saying, you know what, I want to do both. I want to create beautiful handcrafted work that still benefits the greater good. Once you understand your story, you get a roadmap for where you need to go. And the next key is the secret to success. That's perseverance. Learning to master something is a long road. It requires endurance, and there's no shortcuts. That's why we don't see many masters. So the key is you can't wait for the conditions to be perfect before you start something, because they never will be. Just start where you are with what you have and do what you can. Chuck Close said, inspiration's for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. And as the quote says, you could do anything but not everything. So in order to be successful, you have to concentrate on your strengths. Don't waste all this time cultivating skills where you have little competence. Instead, focus and get better on what you're already good at. Hard work's going to trump inherited talent every single time. So just like Aristotle reminded us, we are what we repeatedly do. So excellence then is not an act, it's a habit. What's that? I was actually reminded of that many years ago. This is kind of random, but I keep this pair of drumsticks fairly close to where I work, just as a personal reminder what hard work can do. So I grew up in the country in Illinois, and I learned to play drums at a young age. My parents would take me to these Illinois football games, and I remember just being enamored with the drum line. They were one of the best in the country. And I told them, one day I want to play with them. But there was actually kind of a problem. See, I grew up, and I learned to play like this, and in drum corps, everyone plays like this. It's called traditional. That way, they can do all the cool visuals, and it looks great. But I didn't know anybody that knew how to play that way, which meant I didn't know anybody that could teach me. So I had to be really creative and resilient. I found out about this competition that aired on PBS, and I taped it and would play it back hundreds of times and try to, dissect the mechanics of what it looked like. And that wasn't enough. So then I had to be creative, and I ended up taping my stick to my hand and go to sleep every night, and I'd play on my leg. And I'm not kidding you, I'd wake up most mornings and would still be playing. And just was one of those guys that would practice every spare minute I can get. Had an opportunity to audition. I show up, they had 100 people trying out, and they told me, this year we only have one spot available. But it honestly didn't matter if there were 1,000 people trying out. I knew all that preparation met that opportunity, and I made it. And it was like, once that moment happened, a light bulb went off in my head. It was like, I think I just found the secret to success, and all I have to do is literally just work harder than everybody else. And so that was the case. I wanted to get into industrial design. I always wanted to design shoes for Nike, so they only accepted 30 people in that program. There were 300 applicants. Same kind of story. Had to, be really resilient. Then I decided I wanted to get an MBA, but there was a kind of a problem in the fact that I'd never taken a college-level business class. I had no real-world business experience. I was one of the youngest applicants. And just through a series of kind of grace, they allowed me into the program. But the first day I showed up and I'm looking around and see all these doctors and investment bankers and started getting really overwhelmed until I realized that, excellence is a habit. And so made it out alive, barely. Got down to Nashville here for my first job interview at a music magazine for an art director position. And I remember in the interview, they were really blunt with me. They said, you have a nice portfolio, but honestly, why would we hire you? You have no editorial experience. You have very little print work. And I remember just telling them, if you just give me a chance, I promise you I'll work harder than anybody you've ever hired. And they did. They took a gamble on me, and I got the job. Huge learning curve from day one, lots of long days and late nights, but I learned everything I could. And within 2 years, decided to redesign the magazine. We won a national award for best magazine redesign. Shortly after this was one of the biggest decisions I ever had to make in my life. I'm going to tell you about that in just a little bit. People who have mastered their craft know deliberate practice is the key. It's the secret to continuing to get better. It's not the amount of time you invest, it's the quality of that time. You've probably all heard the 10,000 hour rule, but the truth is, it's not just a matter of logging those hours unless you're deliberate, all that time's lost. The man in the picture, his name's Vladimir Horowitz. He was called the great pianist, won 25 Grammys in his lifetime. And he's a guy that really understood deliberate practice. He has this great quote. He says, if I don't practice for a day, I know it. If I don't practice for 2 days, my wife knows it. If I don't practice for 3, my audience knows it. And one last note about perseverance. I think it's really important to talk about the enemy of creative work, and that's busyness. Socrates said, beware the barrenness of a busy life. You will always fill your time. There's always going to be more work to do. Seems like we have more time than we've ever had before, yet we're busier than we've ever been. Busyness is no longer this badge of honor. So don't confuse being busy with being productive. The key is to learn to work smarter, not harder. So the next key in finding your spark is about expanding your paradigm. There's this saying that discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. And that's done through adventure. So if you study some of the greatest successes in history, they were people just like me and you who were just willing to step out and take risks. But there's something inside that can paralyze us, and that's fear of failure. I remember seeing this Nike ad once that said, everything that you've never seen is beyond just where you always stop. If you wait for the perfect time, sometimes that later can become never. That's why it often just takes a leap of faith. Martin Luther King said, faith is taking the first step even if you can't see the entire staircase. I'm convinced one day we'll be more disappointed by the things we didn't do than the things we did do. Taking a leap might completely defy logic. It might mess up this perfect, comfortable world you've worked so hard to build. But there might be something inside you that just won't let you let it go until you jump. And that was the case for me. So I mentioned I was working at this magazine. I ended up having a little time off and visited a friend in Seattle. We just started talking about life. And through our conversation, we realized we had the exact same feeling about wanting to do something bold. We just started sketching out this vision. As you can see, it was kind of elaborate. And this led to this crazy idea of us quitting our jobs and starting a nonprofit and traveling the world to 6 continents. So when I got home shortly after that, I left my career. I sold most of what I owned and said goodbye indefinitely to my friends and family and my wife, my serious girlfriend who's now my wife. And over the next 18 months, we started this crazy journey. It didn't seem to make sense to a lot of people, but that decision has forever changed me. It's been a driving force in the type of work I want to continue to do the rest of my life. I think I learned more in those 2 years than I had in over 2 decades prior. We were able to partner with nonprofits all over the world, helping to build clean water wells and school classrooms and provide disaster relief, which was great, but I think the biggest impact might have been what happened in my own head, my own heart. It's been said the world is a book, and those who don't travel read only a page. And the reason I share all this with you is that I think so many people I talk with have this idea that one day they're going to save up and start exploring when the time's right, rather than understanding it'll reshape the way you view life. It'll redefine your priorities. It'll cause you to rethink who you are and what you believe, allowing you time to even consider what's unjust and what you might do about it. The more I've traveled, the more I've noticed that people who often seem the happiest are those who possess the least. So this photo was taken in a remote area of Guatemala. The community had no running water, no electricity, no sanitation, yet as you can see, they just kind of radiated this incredible joy that I've rarely seen since. So this leads into the next key, and that's renew. So the definition of renew is to restore or revive. And this is such an important point because so many of us are drained, we're burnt out. We spend the majority of our lives in isolation, sitting alone at our computers. I love the saying, never get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life. You know, there's this entire facet of our lives that we've neglected. So renewing our minds and spirit allows us to live more fully and restore balance back into our lives. You know, one of my favorite analogies with work-life balance was said by the CEO of Coca-Cola in the 1930s. And he just said, imagine life's like a game, which you're juggling 5 balls in the air. And you name them work, family, health, friends, and spirit. And you're keeping all of them in the air. You'll soon understand that work's a rubber ball, so if you drop it, it's going to bounce right back. But the other 4, your family, your health, your friends, and spirit, they're made of glass. So if you drop one of these, they'll be irrevocably nicked, damaged, maybe even shattered. They'll never be the same. The biggest lesson I've learned over the years is the greatest reflection of your priorities is where you place your time. So if you say one of your priorities is one of these glass balls, your family or your spirit, that statement will only be true if your calendar reflects it. So how do you find balance? It first starts by eliminating noise, eliminating distractions. You know, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And the average American spends at least 8.5 hours a day in front of a screen, so it's obvious that we're addicted to noise. We have to learn, like M. Russell Ballard said, that digital technology should be our servants, not our masters. There was a recent Reddit poll that asked if someone from the 1950s suddenly appeared, what would be the most difficult thing to explain to them about life today? And there was this brilliant answer. Someone said, I possess a device in my pocket that's capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man, and I use it to look at pictures of cats and get in arguments with strangers. You know, another important point to renewing is to understand the thief of joy, and that's comparison. And what Anne Lamott said, some wonderful, dazzling successes are going to happen to some of the most awful, angry, undeserving people you know. People who are, in other words, not you. You know, it's so easy to get caught up in this world of comparison. You all could probably relate if you've ever had a friend outbid you on a job, or maybe you find some amazing party that happened over the weekend that you weren't invited to, or maybe you stumble on some amazing portfolio and you find out it's a 12-year-old Ukrainian kid doing better work than you. I recently saw the formula to be miserable, and that's to constantly compare your real life to everybody else's online edited versions of their lives. You know, everything online is edited and curated. It's kind of become a facade, and these perfect streams have become representations of who we are, not who we truly are, and all that can steal our joy. So what do you do about it? So if comparison is the thief of joy, then the way to restore our joy is through gratitude and contentment. You know, it's been said the attitude of gratitude keeps the mind renewed. But we actually have to learn to be grateful, to transform the way we think about life, even in the smallest details. Here's a great example right here. Have you all thought about how amazing it is that we have pure, clean water whenever we want it? Did you know that there are women in Africa right now who spend 6 to 7 hours a day, every day of their life, looking for clean water? A lot of times when they find something, it might be a dirty, stagnant pond that they're forced to fill a 5-gallon bucket full, put it back on their head, can weigh up to 50 pounds full, then they walk all the way back home through this treacherous terrain, get home, not knowing if it has parasites in it, but they know they have to cook with it, give it to their kids, knowing it could make them and their whole family sick. You know, honestly, I've never had a day in my entire life that I've woken up and thought, in this country, I wonder if this water I'm going to drink is going to make me sick or if I can give it to my kids. And this is one example. You know, Bonhoeffer said, we hardly ever realize in ordinary life we receive a great deal more than we give. It's only through gratitude that life becomes rich. It's so easy to waste our days and our hours, to overlook being present, to take for granted the way the sunrise bursts through the darkness every morning, or to look our kids in the eyes, or to be engaged with our spouse or loved one. You know, it's kind of easy to exist instead of live. So next time something good happens, I just want to encourage you all to stop what you're doing and just appreciate that moment. I've heard it said to think of life like a terminal illness, because if you do, then you'll learn to live it with joy and passion as it ought to be lived. You know, once your mind's renewed, then you can begin to find clarity in solitude. And some argue that solitude is the single most important habit for productive creatives. The man in the picture, his name is Matthew Ricard. He was declared the happiest man alive after a group of scientists found that his brain produces a level of gamma waves that they'd never before seen in the field of neuroscience. And the remarkable thing is, to me, is they asked him what he was thinking about, what he was meditating on when he reached that state. And you know what he said? He said empathy. He was thinking about compassion and serving. And that leads right into the final key that gives us our true meaning, that's kindness. One of my favorite quotes is, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And I'm convinced the way that we come alive, the way we find our true meaning is to serve those in need, to give generously, to love extravagantly. This train station in Agra, India kind of redefined my paradigm of that. So I was traveling alone at this point in my trip. I'd gotten my stuff stolen, was just really beat down. India's a tough place to travel. And for those of you that don't know, there's a caste system in India. And the lowest caste is called the Dalits, or the untouchables. And it's a pretty heavy topic because you can walk by somebody that's a Dalit, they might be dying on the street, and some people will just ignore them. Or at times, parents or an abductor will even mutilate their own children, so someone will see them on the street and have compassion on them. So I'm sitting waiting for my train, and this child with no legs drags himself up to me and asks if he could have something to eat. He was starving, and I see this food cart, so I bought him a plate of food. And before I realized it, I was surrounded by children that were just starving, so I just bought plate after plate, and I look up, and my train had gotten there. And I remember just getting on the train and looking out the window and just in that moment saying, God, where are you? Like, how could you allow this to happen? And made eye contact with a kid who ran up to me and put his hands on the bars of the window and asked if he could have my water. Thinking he was thirsty, I slid it through the window to him. And instead of taking a drink, he ran over to a young child he was caring for and held it in his arms and gave him a drink. And it was like, in that moment, God showed me his heart. He said, you asked where I am. I'm right there. I'm with the poor and the suffering. And I'm with you if you're with them. So now that I've seen him, I have this new conviction to love the unlovable and have a boldness to stand up for those that need a voice. You know, your art is a gift to people to help their lives be better and brighter. So be generous with the life you've been given. You know, 100 years from now, it's not going to matter that you got to level 92 on Candy Crush, but the world could be changed forever because you made a difference in somebody's life. Lombardi said the measure of who we are is what we do with what we have. You know, you're responsible for the talent that's been entrusted to you. So be a light and don't cheat us of your contribution. I'd like to close with a quote from Stephen Pressfield. He just asks, are you a born writer? Were you put on earth to be a painter, a scientist, an apostle of peace? In the end, the question can only be answered by action. Do it or don't do it. And may I hope to think of it this way. If you were meant to cure cancer or write a symphony or crack cold fusion and you don't do it, you not only hurt yourself, even destroy yourself. You hurt your children, you hurt me, you hurt the planet. You shame the angels who watch over you, and you spite the Almighty who created you and only you with your unique gifts of nudging the human race 1 millimeter farther on its path along back to God. And creative work is not a selfish act or a bid for attention on the part of the actor. It's a gift to the world and every being in it. Thank you.
Lee, can you tell just another story about your travels?
Gosh, that's a big one. Man. You travel, it's hard to kind of put into words what's happening because it's so tough when you travel long term. It's different than a vacation. But I think it just, I mentioned that how your paradigm changes. And I think that's one thing, I think just from the grueling nature of it, you start to see that when you get back home, just everything seems like such a luxury. You know, even the diversity of food we get to eat on a regular basis, that's actually a luxury for people. You know, some people eat fish every day, for every meal. You know, there's things like that. So sorry I can't think of a specific example. But yeah, it's continued to be this theme in my life that reemerges all the time, and just in terms of gratitude. So get out and explore as much as you can.
Yeah. Other than the appreciation for all the luxuries when you came back after 18 months, what were the first couple things you did in your daily life, other than show that appreciation, that really kind of represented that change in you, or what you had experienced?
The first thing I did was marry my wife. I surprised her with a proposal. She had no idea she thought I was in Africa. So that was kind of whirlwind. And then it, honestly, when you travel and don't really have an expectation of what's next, you begin to kind of live on faith. And I think I came back, she left her career, I didn't have a job, and we're just like, hey, let's do this together. Let's just start a company. And it was one of those things that was very easy because every day you're used to saying, I don't know where I'm going to sleep. Oh, late at night you're in the red light district in Bangkok, and you're like, I guess we're sleeping here tonight. Not ideal, but you're used to kind of going with the flow. And I think that kind of nature was the biggest thing, was like living kind of in faith and in boldness every day. So I would say in this context, if we would have just gotten married and I wouldn't have gone, I don't know if I would be in the place I am now. I'd probably just be at a normal 9 to 5 because I wouldn't have had that conviction. I might have been too scared to jump out.
One more question. Yes.
Can you share one regret in your life?
Awesome question.
Oh my gosh, it's like a job interview. I think my biggest regret is, I've lived so much of my life being selfish, thinking about my identity, my portfolio, kind of everything around me. And I think that's looking back at some of the friendships I've lost or things like that I've neglected because of that. I would say that's probably the biggest thing I've regretted over the years, is just maybe being so intrinsically focused on my own career and all that. And maybe those of you that might know me from a long time ago, I think I was a different person, so.
Thanks, Lee, for sharing. It was
Thank you.
inspirational.
Thank you.